So in my sort of 15 minutes of fame this morning, before we introduce our wonderful guest speaker, Guy Huntington, is to look at human autonomy in emerging technology systems. And I'm going to be extremely provocative. Extremely. I think a few of you in the room are used to that, including Pat Scannell and Eusebio and Ethan Berger. But I want to focus on this notion of identification. And if we go back to Kevin Ashton in 1999, 1998, he basically said if we had computers that knew everything there was to know about things, using data they gathered without any help from us, we would be able to track and count everything and greatly reduce waste, loss, and cost. Now, what we've done is we've taken this concept of IoT and introduced what I would call an IOU, an Internet of Us. And it's no longer just about the computers knowing everything about the data as it's being transferred through various modulations, but it's also about knowing where people are. And so we have this notion of a globe. People are on the move. We are emerging into what we are calling a smart world or smart cities, where everything is sort of in a cyber-physical state. People are tracked. And we have a static sort of buildings and infrastructure view, and we have a dynamic view. So cars, goods, people, insects, animals, even information is dynamic. It moves from one server to the other. We move across streets. We move across a physical space. We're embodied objects. We're humans. And then there's the static space, which is a cyber-physical space, which is, fairly stable. In this room, we can change the configuration of the tables, but it's still a room. I can knock down the walls, but it's not so easy to do that. I could have total visibility of the physical space if I wanted to, and of course we've seen Google do that over so many years. They're crawling through the world, actually taking photographs and moving images of everything that surrounds us. And we also want to do this to our homes. We want to interconnect things. We want things remotely triggerable via phones and smartphones. And in the near future, we will likely be looking at the same kind of thing for our bodies. Body area networks, which allow for gateways of information to trespass onto our body with consent, whether it's a wearable device or an implantable device. There's an access point. So right now we can point to hubs on the ceiling or hubs outside. In the future, people may be opting in for a hub on their being. And so we've studied this. We've called this Uberveillance. M.G. Michael defined Uberveillance in 2006 and said this is like the eye-plant view. This is the quantified self view. This is the sensory view. And as we work outwards, we see we have a satellite view, a street view, a person view. So imagine I was wearing wearable glasses, beaming out and recording you as I'm speaking, or receiving a feed through one of my lenses, telling me, perhaps prompting me, what my notes were for this particular session. Or, in fact, seeing the remote participants at home. But as we move from the satellite view, the God view, to the street view, right on level playing field, and the person view, when I'm wearing something sort of recording outwards or intaking information, we end up with the lowest common denominator, which is what M.G. Michael called Uberveillance. It's that implantable device, the big brother on the inside looking out. It's the black box recording unit within that not only garners physiological characteristics, but also may be aware of the space around it. But there are terms and conditions. And with Christine Paraxelis and Robo Abbas, we have defined various types of contexts, automatic data exchanges, terms and conditions. This is like the rules of engagement. You want to send me information? Okay, if I've consented and if I've requested it. You want to capture information about me? Okay, make me aware of it if I'm in a public space. But if I'm in a private space, give me the option, or at least look at those things that I've set up in terms of where I sit on that scale of acceptability. So Uberveillance is about embedded objects in subjects. It's about the who, the where and the condition, the physiological state, and it's placing all these three things together to garner what we call, at least in national security terms, situational awareness. It's the ability to do predictive profiling, to be the all-seeing, all-knowing eye, but the issue with Uberveillance is that context will always be missing. No matter how much tech there is around the room, no matter how much tech I'm wearing, no matter how much tech I've swallowed, the context is still missing. And so we argue, while you have what we call near real time, you will never have real-time thoughts unless we have our third or fourth speaker, James Giordano, telling us later this morning that even those things that we hold sacred in our heads will actually be transferable in terms of bits and bytes. And so the fallacy of Uberveillance is, while it's so fantastic, at least in thought, we can actually have misrepresentation, misinformation, and information manipulation occurring as a result. So with Professor Schneiderman, I basically said, right, the perfect auditability tool is the implant, Professor Schneiderman, but what is wrong with it? And we began discussing the pitfalls of Uberveillance as we saw them. And so we're not talking about implantable systems when we talk about auditable systems. We just have to look at social media to look at the failure of disinformation and other things that we've been privy to with regards to social media. But before we say this is the panacea, we want to interrogate it further. But many people are, including defense, including industry personnel, including heads of banks that have talked to us after seeing our research. They are thinking about this model. They're thinking about the black box recorder that is on planes, but rather is on us. It is our alibi. It is our Jiminy Cricket. And so the Australian Defence Forces long ago, with the company Miriota, decided they would have the fight recorder, not the flight recorder, but the fight recorder. And if I go back one, there's the flight recorder that sits on the plane, the black box. But now we're talking about this thing here being the defence personnel's hub. It's a wearable. It's a fight recorder. It has gone where the soldier has gone. It has taken footage, perhaps. It is storing vital credentials, perhaps secret encrypted information. Who knows what's on the fight recorder, right? Medical data. So we're moving towards the hacking of the human heart and perhaps the hacking of the human brain, as we'll later this morning find out. But all of these things are very important. Just when we think we have everything, total information awareness. In fact, if we place our faith in these kinds of systems, what we might have is the greatest annihilation of trust. Not because these systems can't collect data physiologically and perhaps even in the future with Neuralinks neurologically, but because if there is any tampering with these systems, the traceability of that is very difficult to detect. So when we've gone completely digital as a human, and we have no paper trails, we don't even have a digital transaction-based trail, we just have an implant, which lets you have access or not, be blocked or not, then we may well be hedging our bets on the lowest common denominator that has the most asynchronous and asymmetric fallout. But there are people still continuing with this. We have dangerousthings.com a couple of years ago launching their Vivo key. So if you look up Vivo key, you can see a lot of interest in using your hand, which may have an implant just there on the other side, to transact, to transport, to ticket, to gain access to money. Why carry cards at all? And companies like Autodesk have invested, this is a Chai paper from 2012, in different kinds of capabilities, adding function to our body. The tactile button, the pressure sensor, the tap sensor, the vibration mode, the LED, the speaker. And a lot of biohackers have caught on to this notion of how can I use my body beyond its current function and amplify, enhance. And so now we're looking at different operational scenarios. I could be, wearing a wearable and interacting with this screen, perhaps with this audio or visual button. That's one operational scenario. I could be wearing my phone, and I could be holding another device, and I could be doing what ScanScoo is doing there, and so that's wearable to wearable, that's on body. Or I can go external, like the tablet, and in body. This is a real image. Wetware Grindhouse decided to do some self-biohacking and then some interesting stitching there. So Tim Cannon here, depicted here, is having his vital signs sent to his tablet. And of course the Viva Key, where the implant now is using the smartphone. So definitely I agree with all those people that say, don't worry about implants, they're just proximity chips, they're passive, because now all we need is our smartphone to read the implant, and we have a global positioning capability as well as a condition monitor. So just, hey, implant something as small as this, and then I can tell you things about you remotely, and you can also use that identity chip with the location information on the GPS sensor embedded in the phone to look at your condition and then give you access or not. So we're moving towards an implantable space. We call this the electrophorus, the bearer of light. Electromagneticus is another term we've defined, where we talk about where we're going. Are we, we've reached the capacity of how many IoT devices we can put out there. Let's just start putting the IoT devices within us. And in 2005, we had created this speculative network diagram. I had just come out of telecommunications at the time, looking at what we called the hierarchical positioning system, where we started with the global positioning system. You started with the cellular networks. You got down to the wireless local area networks. You had devices in it. You can see how old this Nokia device is. It was one of the first RFID reader-based Nokias, and then you can communicate with that RFID chip. NIST has talked about this widely, particularly about standards for the body area networks, going from the MIX to the WMTS to the ISM to the ultra-wideband. They've talked about where is it best to place these devices on the body, and these are 4-year-old presentations now. We've got standards defined by IEEE. We have people looking at the telemetry of war, going back and citing Libicki, the where, the what, the who, the when, the why, the how, and to be honest, that is Uberveillance. I cite this paper often by R.E. Burnett, who's at the National Defence University and a good friend. But if we look at this, there are companies now investing time in bringing in implantable sensors to everyone. So Medtronic in 2014 launched this campaign through our IEEE Spectrum, saying, hey, everyone should have one of these in their body. We could tell you how your heart's going, whether your temperature's skyrocketing, whether all of these things are happening. This is not a heart pacemaker. It's actually the size of a AAA battery, and it could reveal a lot about your current state. It's a sort of preemptive device that monitors and helps you out when you need it. We then ran a special issue in Technology and Society magazine, which looked at brain implants in the military, especially for those with post-traumatic stress disorder, but then we started to think about other applications. So the question is whether the human is the limiting factor. And this man here says, I question if technology has progressed to the point where the human condition is now the limiting factor, physically and psychologically. I think, Pat, you may well be talking to us about this more than Dr. Hall. And he talks about command, control, and communications, and then adds a whole bunch of other C's to the party: cybersecurity, capability, capacity, consideration, compromise, and confidence. He calls it the C9. Now we have other people talking about in the military, like the Canadian Military Journal, Max Mashord Shields, talking about how we could augment with various capacities. How do we augment our cognition, our physiomechanical structures, our sensorial capacity, our metabolic? And he has some ideas there, including genetic engineering, exoskeletons, and more. So it's about Uberveillance. I've deduced that today, much of what we're going to be talking about is electronic surveillance of information, potentially embedded in the body and perhaps not. But I think it'll be a meeting of within and without. Elon Musk has already jumped on this bandwagon in 2016, although the concept is not new at all, with his Neuralink technologies. He says we have to merge with the AI or be left behind. That may add some spice to today. There's a surgeon who wants to connect you to the internet with a brain implant. In fact, there are even what we call brain nets, potentially, brain-to-brain interfaces. So imagine we wanted to communicate. Is that where we're going? This is a Nature article, by the way. So forget about the IoT, the Internet of Things network. What about the brain network? What about our brains sending and receiving information in a bi-directional way? And I'll finish on this last slide before we welcome our next speaker of the day. The first one of the day is the axis of access. And MG Michael has constantly battled with this slide. For the first time, we've talked about the concept before, dating back to around 2007-8. But last year in December, in front of an audience that was mainly FBI biosecurity people, we presented the axis of access. Now, one of the main issues with implantable devices is who has access. And from the demonstrated use cases we have today, we find that the patient, the patient and carer have very limited access to the data. Look at heart implant. Look at diabetes pumps. There's this war going on at the moment with who has access. So the bearer of the technology does not have access. In fact, the police with a warrant have access. Specialist interpreters like cardiologists or surgeons have access. Hackers have access by brute force. Manufacturers have access, it's their technology. They claim that they own the device that we bear, just like the smartphones we carry. We think they're ours, they're not ours. Google Glass, in the terms and condition, was not your device. It belonged to Google. And they said it clearly in the terms and conditions. We have the right to switch off. That's the actual wording that they use, the right to switch off. And so perhaps the Central Intelligence Agency has the greatest access. So when we talk about the access, it's this, but the access to the data, or the black boxes, or the complexity, or the algorithms, or the data we'll be talking about today. The individual, the citizen, the patient, the me, does not have access, but higher powers do. And what we've seen with OpenAPS is this battle rage in December, where big manufacturers in the biomedical space like Medtronic said, hey, you diabetes guys out there who hacked our Medtronic, and you now can do this and this through iPhone, right? The Apple device. We're gonna block you. You have no right to be tampering. We are the manufacturers. You have no right to be tampering with our data. And so this stakeholder and axis of access that Michael has honed in on is exactly what I want us to talk about today when we are talking about reliable, safe, and trustworthy systems. Because it's a paradox. We want to have responsible AI. We want to have the capacity to audit. We want to have algorithms that do what they're supposed to do, and data that proliferates to help us and to give back to a democracy. But the issue is we have this state of play as well, where there is a security. So I'm not going to pose this as a security versus privacy debate, but rather a security and privacy debate.